Welcome to today's panel, Social Media and Youth, Perils, Powers, and Pathways to Resilience. My name is Ingrid Severson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the project manager with the Pacific Southwest MHTTC. Really happy to welcome you all to today's panel. A little bit about the objectives and the background of what's brought us here today. So we strive to be responsive to the needs and interests of the mental health workforce. And we've been hearing a need to address and better understand the impact and risks of social media on youth. We've also heard this from mental health providers within a wide spectrum of roles, not just in our region, but across the whole country. And we understand social media is a big part of adolescents' lives, and this has been linked to a negative impact on young people's mental health. So there's debate about whether social media is positive or negative for young people, and it might not be one or the other. A recent report from the American Pediatric Association states that, and I'll quote, "Using social media is not inherently beneficial or harmful to young people. Adolescents' lives online both reflect and impact their offline lives," end quote. So we're excited to hear more about this report from one of its co-authors, Dr. Sharmaraman, in today's panel, and understand more of the guidelines and the research on the topic. And so we'll hear a range of perspectives from two research scientists in today's session. Dr. Sharmaraman will share highlights from the APA's advisory. Dr. Tanksley's work examines the educational and mental health effects of algorithmic racism and the experiences of young Black students. And we're also really grateful to have youth voice in today's conversation, and we'll hear from Emma Lemke, founder of Log Off. Emma is an advocate and activist who works to make digital spaces safer for young people through political and social action. We're also glad to have Skylar Blankenship present on the work they do with the LGBTQ+ young people and their observations and reflections of the perils and positives of social media for this community. And just a last note, I want to clarify that we're focusing on youth within the early to late adolescent to early adulthood age range, and so generally between 10 to 24 years old. Just wanted to touch on that, as it can be a broad statement to say youth. And so you can see all the objectives here on the slide, but I do want to stop talking and go ahead and get to the bulk of today's presentation. So with that, let's turn to our presenters, who are well-established and remarkable leaders in their line of work. So honored to have Dr. Linda Sharmaraman, who is a senior research scientist at Wellesley Centers for Women. As a founder and director of the Youth Media and Wellbeing Research Lab, her research focuses on diverse adolescents' risk and resilience using social technologies.
So I wanted to say that part of my work is that I am going to be focusing on the youngest users of social media, kind of like in the 10 to 17 age range. And for my first slide, I wanted to showcase the age of cell phone use versus the social media first time use. That I'm sure you all might have this sense that cell phone use has gotten earlier and younger as time has gone on, and the average age for cell phone use nowadays is 10.3. And so I think it's a very legitimate question to ask young people nowadays. So do you have a phone or don't you? Because usually, pretty soon after you get a cell phone, what comes next? So if you go to the next, it's like an animation. Yes, for social media, that comes very soon after. So whether it's one site versus many sites all at once, they all kind of come very soon after you sign up for social media. So if you could see these ages, a lot of people are very, very surprised at how young people start having a cell phone and social media, but it's actually very normative and kind of nowadays it's just part of the social norms in the peer culture now. And when people think about how young people are on these sites and getting their phones, they wonder, okay, is it a positive thing? Is it a negative thing? And nationally representative, samples and different studies, big studies, point to the fact that most of the experiences are positive. Now, as mental health professionals, most of the time you're probably getting access and hearing from most of the negative stuff, right? And that makes sense. But when you look at the people across the board, boys and girls and people in between, especially girls, they feel like there's a lot of positivity. 80% of them feel more connected to their friends, what's going on in their lives. They also feel that there's negative stuff, there's drama, and sometimes they feel worse about themselves, about their life, which is actually a normal thing in the teen years, because when you're comparing yourself to other peer lives, whether it's online or offline, that is something that happens whether you have a social media account or not. It also happens in the hallways, but the social media highlights it because it's a digital archive. So that makes it even more kind of distracting. And so when you are a provider of a young person, most of the times you kind of want to do both of these, right? Encourage opportunities for them to have, strength and assets and explore themselves, but you also want to limit risks. Now, most of the media headlines are about what not to do, limiting risks, not getting yourself into a lot of trouble with meeting up with strangers, or stranger danger, that kind of thing, or online predators, and people are so worried about the things not to do. But most of the time, most people don't know what to do. And in fact, a lot of the parenting involved and the digital literacy programs that are in the schools are only about limiting risk. They don't tell people how it could be a positive kind of thing in your life. You can explore your interactions that are respectful, and you can be engaged. You can explore your identities depending on what kind of social group that you belong to. Yeah, so this advisory from the American Psychological Association, which I happen to be one of the co-authors of this task force, they wanted to remind people that it's really normal to want to seek out social support on social media. It creates opportunities, so I would say that you don't have to worry about somebody or client or a young person unless there's warning signs. The warning signs include things like they can't complete normal everyday daily life tasks. They can't get their homework done. They can't show up to meals with the family. They don't want to talk to anybody offline. They don't want to hang out with their friends anymore in person. Their grades are slipping. They are getting really distracted so that they can't actually participate in regular everyday life. That's when you want to get more help and find out what the root cause is. And it might not be social media. It could be about a friendship drama thing that happens to be online as well, but also offline. So you want to really figure out where it could be. And some people really try to steer people away from online drama if they have signs of depression and loneliness, but for some people, it actually might be a good way of feeling like they have control over what they present online, and they might want to be able to practice some of these social interactions in a very controlled way, things that might feel more anxious if they're in person. So for some people, it might actually be a nice training ground. And so the onboarding of this age period of, any time between 10 to 13, 14, some of them, for some of these features of social media sites, it might be developmentally not as appropriate because they don't realize just how much information can overload their brains, as their brains are growing, and developing and maturing with the executive functioning, and try to figure out what to attend to and what not to attend to. That might be really overwhelming for some youth. There's also the fear of missing out. If you're seeing things that other people are doing and, you feel kind of left out, or maybe you've increased your network size really fast because you're just accepting any friend request that comes at you, and you're not really being very proactive about limiting your social obligations. That could be overwhelming, and so those are some things that are intervenable, because you can really look at somebody's network size and say, okay, why do you have 1,000 people on your network? Do you know 1,000 people? Maybe there's a bunch of celebrities, that are showcasing like unrealistic beauty ideals or lifestyles. And so those are some things to think about. So social media doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. It's not just about on or off. It's about, okay, what can you role into somebody's, digital space to, get them to learn how to drive, in this digital space. You don't want to get them onto the highway right away with all keys access. You want to get them to drive and park in a parking lot for a while, and then they can go onto the side roads where there's hardly any traffic. Same thing for social media. And the Surgeon General put out this loneliness, kind of epidemic, cause for concern out there. And I wanted to bring it up because people don't normally think of teenagers as being lonely. They think of seniors, maybe people who are retired, as part of that loneliness epidemic, but it also applies to teens. People could be constantly connected, but still feel really lonely because they feel really left out. And just to remember that social connection actually can affect your physical health as well. There was a study that said that the lack of social connection could be like smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which is really alarming, that how much that impact is on young people. And so just to remind people that social media the whole point is to be social in ways that, you can handle, the young person can handle. And when a lot of times when people are worried about digital footprint and privacy concerns, sometimes you can overly tell people, don't do anything on social media, just look, but don't touch, don't involve, don't engage, don't post anything. A lot of parents say that actually to the young people. And for some people, it makes sense because they know their kid very well. They get triggered very easily about certain things. But for most people, passive use actually has been found to be related to more feeling more depressed and lonely, because you don't get to interact with people that you find your people. You find people that belong to a group that you would love to interact with them about your love of anime, or that you're an LGBT coming out person, and you have nobody to talk to in real life. I mean, these are things that could be a lifesaver for some people. And the Surgeon General also put out a call, an advisory very recently about, the calling attention to the fact that marginalized youth and underserved youth are often affected by social media in different ways. Girls are more susceptible to body dissatisfaction. I actually have a study myself that we published in our lab about how, girls' attention to comments about their body and also photos of celebrities really impacts their body dissatisfaction. Also, the larger the network size, the more they see those images flooding their news feeds. And so that's something to think about for girls in particular. And then there's also the fact that some groups are racial, sexual, and gender minority groups, and emerging finding that in our lab that has realized that although LGBT youth are found to be quite lonely compared to their heterosexual counterparts, the receiving of social support on social media doesn't help with their loneliness. However, the giving and providing of social support to their peers really helps their loneliness. So that's something to think about as a provider. And it could be a very important identity affirming space online for girls of color in particular. And in fact, girls of color are the most avid users in all young people of social media. And so really think about that as a very salient topic to talk about in your sessions for girls of color in particular. And I just have a couple more slides, and I wanted to really talk about Asian American youth, because most national studies don't include Asian American youth in their racial breakdowns, because there's not enough Asian American youth in those national studies to call out group differences. And so our lab is trying to look at Asian American youth in particular to see if there's something to talk about. And since this, region 9 of this webinar goes to a lot of Asian dominant areas like the Pacific Islands and Hawaii and California, I wanted to kind of bring this out. And so Asian American youth do feel a lot of stigma. They're the least likely out of all the racial groups to seek counseling, and they also don't reach out to other people on social media for help, unlike other kids of color, Black, Latina, all of them, they actually do seek out help to reduce their social isolation, to look for people that are like them, but Asian American youth don't. And especially during the pandemic, there's a lot of hate messaging. I know that Dr. Tingsley is going to talk about hate messaging later, but for Asian Americans, there was a lot, of course, as you can imagine, about COVID-19 pandemic. There was a lot of hate messaging that increased the depression, and even in studies even before the pandemic, Asian American youth and Pacific Islander youth are quite affected by cyberbullying, victimization. They have more substance use, depression, suicide attempts. And it's something that I want to just point out, that cyberbullying for Asian American youth might have a lot to do with how much saving face, like if you want to save face, if people say something offensive about their family, about their racial group, it in their mind, that's definitely cyberbullying for them. It's not just about them, it's about their community and their family as well. So next slide, I think, is the last one. I want to make sure there's plenty of time for everybody else. So my last slide, I wanted to bring out what the American Academy of Pediatrics just put out a narrative about advancing a new narrative that digital media use is developmentally appropriate, that it's identity exploration, it's a time for peer connection and exploring autonomy, that there are risks and benefits of digital media for people of all ages, adults too. As you can imagine, the things that you kind of struggle with are things that could be the things that young people are struggling with, but they're in a different digital space than you all. And that there's a shame-based narrative that is often kind of perpetuated in the media, that any digital media use is somehow extraneous and unproductive and a waste of time. But think about how young people of today, they kind of grew up with, this is all that they know. And so if you make them feel guilty about any of the use, even if it's healthy use and they can, get on with their lives, it might backfire. So that's all I wanted to take here today, but thank you so much for listening, and feel free to check out our webpage on our lab. I'd be happy to share any papers with you all if you wanted to hear about any of these studies I mentioned. Our website is youthmediawellbeing.org, and we have an Instagram account, Youth Media Wellbeing, as well, that we only put out research-related findings.
Have a moment to reflect on Dr. Sharmarman's presentation. Just to really recognize that it's nice that she touched on some of these specific populations that we'll be delving into further with our other panelists today. And so it's just nice to have that kind of like a priming couple points to have in consideration. Can you specify who are considered as Asian American? Does this include Pacific Islander? As I know sometimes they are also included, was the question, which is a really good point, in that our Center, the Pacific Southwest MHTTC, does cover the US Pacific Islands. And so
it depends on the study and how they actually defined it. And one of the studies that I did point out, they use the acronym AAPI, so Asian American and Pacific Islanders, which would include, East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian, and the Pacific Islanders, so the Hawaii, Guam, those Samoa, those kinds of areas. But a lot of times, unless you are dealing with a study that's on the West Coast, the Pacific Islanders are usually not included in those studies because they don't have enough people in that sample to single them out as their own separate group. And so it really depends on how those studies defined it.
Great, thank you. We'll go ahead and pass on the mic to our next presenter. And this is Emma Lemke, who's a digital advocate at Washington University in St. Louis, working to address social media's impact on younger generations. As a senior in high school, Lemke founded Log Off, which is a youth movement dedicated to uplifting and empowering youth to tackle the complexities of social media and its impact on their privacy, safety, and mental health.
I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently in Birmingham, Alabama, where I started the movement in the summer of my senior year in high school, but I'm currently a rising junior at Washington University in St. Louis, studying political science on a pre-law track. You can go to the next slide. But the reason why I'm here today is practically because I founded the Log Off movement, a movement that is by teens for teens, dedicated to rethinking social media. But the reason that I really began my journey into digital well-being, social media's impact on youth mental health began with my own experience. My own experience started at the age of 13 or at the age of 12, when I got my first social media account, starting with Instagram and working my way up the ranks through Twitter, Facebook, and eventually now to TikTok. But I remember, ironically, I was one of the last in my friend groups to get social media. And I say that now, as a 20-year-old, and obviously in the last slides, we see that age has even creeped lower. But very quickly, I began asking why all my friends were gravitating towards their screen rather than interacting with me in an in real life situation and social setting. So I jumped online, was super excited to find out what magic was pulling in. And after a few months of scrolling, I very quickly began to realize that magic was actually an illusion, a mirage, and I was a player in a game that was attempting to maximize my profit rather than prioritizing my well-being. So what that meant is I'm someone who's predisposed to issues related to mental health. I have a generalized anxiety disorder and OCD. And I very quickly began to see that the things that I was working on in therapy and beyond were exacerbated online. My depression and my anxiety were heightened as I began to quantify my worth through likes, comments, and followers. Constant notifications pulled me in through FOMO, and I began to feel anxious if I wasn't around my phone or scrolling. And all of that, culminated into a social media addiction, scrolling for 5 to 6 to 7 hours per day, really mindlessly. And as mentioned previously, in a very passive manner, that just made me feel worse about my mental health while I wasn't able to really mobilize on the beneficial aspects of the online world. So that experience led me to where I am today, where in the the summer of my senior year, I launched the log off movement after having unplugged for a few months to really rethink my own usage and to gain a better relationship with my tech. I found out that while there was a ton of research that was emerging looking at the intersection between young people's mental health and social media usage, the one thing I couldn't really find were the voices of young people themselves to help inform dialogue, to really have productive conversations regarding youth usage, and to just kind of connect with one another about building better habits based off of our own, experiences as digital natives. So I wanted to form that community. So that's what Log Off was initially, just a community seeking to further the dialogue about the multifaceted nature of social media and to promote its healthier usage. I'll talk about a little bit about our impact, but the major thing that I really wanted to emphasize is through my work with Log Off, what it has really meant is, we started off with a website with the idea for a community. Very quickly, people around me were saying, do you think individuals will be interested? And I said, I hope so. I was just in Birmingham, Alabama. I was hoping to mobilize the people around me. But when I launched the Teen Leadership Council as an attempt to pull in more individuals to brainstorm how we could have these conversations, one of the first people that applied was from the Philippines. And to me, that was an indication that this is an issue that a lot of young people actually care about and want to discuss, if discussed in the proper manner with the proper platform, in a judgment-free zone, as mentioned earlier. So a lot of the work that I've been doing with Log Off it started through our website initiatives such as the Wellbeing Initiative, the Female Initiative, our Teen Leadership Council, and it's really expanded into just other mediums such as campaign building, and continuing to carve out spaces online for young people to connect with one another and to build relationships regarding screen time usage and share those kind of materials to help in alleviating the burden that social media can cause on young people's mental health while talking with like-minded individuals. Our impact has really been much more profound than we had anticipated and than I had anticipated being from Birmingham, Alabama. We've engaged with individuals in over 150 countries, have accessed our materials. We have over 32,000 views on just our website alone. And really what that has meant for us is we've continued to work very consciously and critically at Log Off about how to carve out proper dialogues and how to frame the narrative around youth mental health. I think it was stated perfectly prior that social media is not all good, it's not all bad. Every individual should take proper time to reflect and to build out with the people around them proper usage based off of, you know, their mental state, how they benefit the most from social media, and what boundaries need to be put into place to maximize the beneficial capacities of the online world, and to really work critically together to minimize harms, either through community or through external tools that can be implemented. And one thing that we've really done is to work in the media and beyond in reframing youth engagement around social media's impact on mental health, away from just this idea that young people are passive victims of big tech. We're not passive victims of big tech. Young people can be active agents of change if involved, and if their stories are uplifted to inform effective solutions, both through intervention or the legislative process. Social and political and mental kind of currents can be shaped and informed through youth involvement as, you know, agents of change. So that's really when what we have been articulating is leaning away from extreme narratives of screenagers and of young people just being passive victims to individuals who can be active agents of change with the help of others to build up better tech environments for themselves and the people around them to maximize the beneficial capacities of the online world. But oftentimes that can mean other generations need to come in to assist in building those relationships. Especially for me, I was an addicted young person. A lot of people in our community and in Log Off's group were also addicted, and they needed the assistance of the people around them, whether young, whether they were through their therapists, to help aid in that reflective experience and building out those better screen time habits, and then having a judge-free zone to discuss how an individual is being harmed and how they are being benefited via social media. So the future kind of moving forward, what does youth activism look like as we continue into the age of AI and in just delving deeper and deeper into the online world through TikTok and beyond? You can go to the next slide. So Log Off is continuously, and a lot of youth activists, whether it's through Encode Justice, Gen Z for Change, Design It For Us, other popular youth digitally active organizations, people are really consciously looking at how to engage young people so that they can feel supported, they can feel empowered to seek out help, they can feel empowered to build better screen time, habits. And what we are really doing to really aid in that discovery and empowerment is three things. One, we are starting school chapters. Log Off is super excited to engage at college campuses and high schools to pull in kind of dialogues and conversations with mental health professionals and experts to engage in productive social activities beyond just plugging, really working in a holistic manner to build better tech habits with the community around individuals. So we're building out that chapter programming. We are additionally expanding our community efforts to build in streams for young people to connect online in a safe environment. Additionally, we are building out in those community efforts a stream for mental health professionals to feel like they have a space to share resources and to talk specifically at the intersection between young people and youth mental health and social media. So if anyone's interested in building and or in coming into that stream, I can pop more information below. And additionally, we are building out our campaign programming to engage young people in a creative manner where they're at. For our campaign planning, we are really excited to build our first campaign, which is for Accept Phones Down, and release that over the coming months, which is looking at how to prioritize in-person connection over internet connection at the dinner table by partnership strategically with restaurants and beyond. So again, we're super excited with Log Off to just consciously and continuously provide space for young people to discuss how social media impacts their mental health in a very nuanced way, to discuss the benefits and to discuss where we can be harmed, and to work through those stories and experiences to inform solutions and to create and chart a safer online world for all those younger generations to come. So I'm super excited and I'm incredibly grateful to be here and to have discussed a little bit more about my own work and what we're doing, but very thankful that there are professionals and that there are professors out there like many of my panelists who are critically investigating the role that social media plays in exacerbating harms and beneficial capacities online. So I thank you all for your time.
Right. Wow. Definitely want to thank you so much for all of this that you shared, from your own story to the work that you're doing with Log Off. And really, especially glad to hear about the work that your Log Off is doing in the community, in high schools and colleges alike. We have a lot of school mental health professionals in-house here. So hoping that that those opportunities can go out to those folks in the audience. And so I just want to say thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I think one question, if you are open to it, might be what would be like the number one kind of a tip that you share with those younger kind of peers that you may have, like whether they're people joining Log Off, just kind of curious, what would be the main tip that you would share around social media use?
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question. The piece of advice that I provide to any young person who initially comes to us is just to, I say in quotes, like mentally log off, and to really just critically reflect on your own screen time usage and how you can use it in your life as a productive tool. I think oftentimes social media, it attempts to maximize your attention to then maximize profit. And sometimes that doesn't mean that your well-being is prioritized. So I think a lot of time and attention needs to go towards self-reflection to say, how can I use social media again as a tool to aid in my exploration of my identity, the world around me, information, connection, but then also, how do I feel like it can harm me? What things are triggers? What information do I not want to see? And oftentimes people ask, well, how do you start that reflection? And I always say, begin with a 5-minute scroll. Just going through your feed and scrolling for 5 minutes, and at each image or story or whatever medium you're on, critically stopping and saying, how does this make me feel? Am I stressed right now? Who is this person? Just, critically engaging and reflecting on each piece of material. And then from there, acting upon that reflection. So if you feel like you are being harmed, unfollow that person. If you feel as though you like more content, follow more accounts that make you feel better. Those are just simple activities that we always engage young people with, and that we've been told has been helpful in catalyzing deeper reflection after the 5-minute scroll and beyond.
Thank you so much. Go ahead and move forward to Dr. Tiara Tanksley. Dr. Tiara Tanksley is an assistant professor of equity, diversity, and justice and education at the University of Colorado Boulder.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tiara Tanksley, an assistant professor at CU Boulder. Next slide, I have a little bit of information about what I do. Okay, so my talk today is called Race Activism and Digital Trauma, Examining Power and Perils of Social Media for Black Girls. Next slide. So essentially, my research looks at the experiences, particularly of Black youth on social media, but I pay particular attention to algorithmic racism, right? So I'm interested in how the youth experience these systems, how they use them, how they leverage them for social good and activism, but also how these systems are indexed in ways that reify harmful situations for the youth online. So just looking at some of the statistics, Black girls are some of the most visible, vocal, and digitally connected youth online. So I've shared some statistics here just to kind of paint this picture. So African Americans sustain the highest rates of social media use across all youth demographics. College-age girls maintain higher rates of social media use compared to their male peers. Young Black women and girls regularly outconsume their Black male peers by at least 1 hour of popular media intake each day. And Black girls are more likely than other groups to use social media to engage in political conversations about race and racism. And so as a result of these statistics, my research looked at this particular study that I'm going to cover today, looked at Black girl activists who were in this college age range. So they were about 17 all the way up to 24. And I was interested in focusing on this group, not only because they have really high social media usage, but also because there is this understanding of Black girls as being civic agitators, right? Activists. So I wanted to know the folks who are really leveraging these systems in these transformative ways, what are their experiences online? What are some of the hardships or benefits that they're experiencing? So while my research exposed that there was a wealth of benefits online, such as feeling connected to a Black community, for a lot of the participants, they were at predominantly white institutions, that they felt really alone, they were experiencing microaggressions, and they regularly talked about how social media communities, Black Twitter, was a mediating factor in feeling lonely and feeling depressed on campus. So this was like a positive thing. They also felt like there were resources, educational resources, humorous threads, things like that, that brought them joy, that brought them uplift, affirmations, all the things that have been talked about in previous presentations. But I also found that there were unprecedented numbers of viral images of Black people dead and dying that the participants were experiencing. So this study started around 2016. And so the participants in my study were seeing images related to Philando Castile, Eric Brown. They had seen images related to Trayvon Martin, and et cetera. It just kept going, right? So I pulled a couple statistics for, some of these instances recently, just to give an idea of how pervasive these viral images of Black people dead and dying are. So in 2020, George Floyd's murder, his 9-minute death video was viewed over 1.4 billion times online, and that number keeps going. I pulled this number a couple years ago. Live stream footage of Philando Castile being shot by the police accumulated over 2.4 million views in just 24 hours, and this death was live streamed on Facebook, right? So people were actually watching this happen in real time. And then this year in 2023, I think it was January, Tyree Nichols was killed by police, and across a 3-day period, there was a media spectacle happening with news platforms and social media platforms announcing that the video footage was going to be released, and it was a countdown to the footage release. And in this period of time, young Black activists, and even if they didn't identify as activists, young Black kids online were saying, please don't release these videos, don't share these videos, right? They're very traumatizing. So recognizing the virality of Black death, I was interested in what kind of effects this was having on youth who have some of the highest rates of social media use to date, right? So 3 major findings came out of this study and others that I've done since then. The first of which is racial trauma and PTSD. So the number one descriptor used to describe their experiences seeing these images was PTSD. And so I have a quote here where a student, and these are all pseudonyms, but a student says, "We all have PTSD because of social media, because of all of this constant coverage. We have this fear of the police. Emotionally, I can say it has taken a toll on me. It has taken a toll on all of us." Digital harassment was also a common finding. So essentially students would say when they would post about Black Lives Matter, or they would post that they're grieving a loss of somebody who was killed by police brutality, they would experience an influx of digital harassment, threats of lynching, racial slurs, doxing, right, where their address or their personal information, sensitive information would be released, and then people would come to their homes, right? So it was a very terrifying time for our young activists. And one student says, "My social media post became a very popular thing, but with that came a lot of DMs calling me a lot of names I had never heard before in my life. When these messages keep coming in and people keep calling you racial slurs for pointing out a fact, that just takes a toll on you. And you're like, okay, let me just step back for a while." And what's important about this digital harassment piece is that the students were recognizing that this would be hundreds and thousands, right? This wasn't just a couple comments. This was hundreds and thousands of inbox messages. Some of them were automated by bots, and they weren't actually able to use the protective systems encoded within at the time, Facebook or Instagram or Twitter to report these instances, because when they would report the harassment, oftentimes the systems did not determine that these were actually incidences of hate speech. So a lot of the participants at this time said that they just felt hopeless and they felt like they just couldn't log on to social media at all. So many of them just simply deleted their accounts because they didn't see any way of protecting themselves or cleaning out their inboxes. And then finally, educational impacts. So a lot of the students listed things like anxiety, depression, chronic worry, insomnia, migraines, nausea, desensitization, disassociation. And they felt that because they were experiencing those profound mental health issues, they had this effect, right, the spillover effect into the educational experiences. So many of them felt like they couldn't focus. They felt like they were zoned out. A lot of the teachers would kind of reference these instances in class, or they'd have debates about whether or not George Floyd was supposed to die. This was in a later study I just did in 2020. Students was talking about how like George Floyd became a debate topic. I did see this in this original study as well, with issues like Philando Castile being a topic of debate in a social studies class, right? Or a civics class where they're showing the video and talking about things. And students are feeling triggered in school, and they're seeing their grades drop. They're unable to focus on their assignments. They're feeling issues of belonging, or I should say unbelonging in schools. And so one of my participants says, there's sometimes when I see the actual video, and that's when I don't want to leave my room because it's scary. When I saw Philando Castile, I didn't want to go to class. I was so upset. I just felt done. I just wanted to zone out. So it's really important to recognize that there is not this artificial divide between what happens online and what happens in real life, and more specifically, what happens on social media and what happens in our classrooms. Okay, so I just shared this statistic, or this study that came out in 2018, but I had mentioned that a lot of my participants were experiencing unprecedented rates of digital harassment and assault. And so I actually found over and over again that studies have shown that Black girls actually do experience the highest rates of harassment. It wasn't just my subset, it's actually a global phenomenon, with Amnesty International finding that although abuse is targeted at women across the political spectrum, that women of color are much more likely to be impacted, and Black women are disproportionately targeted. So this is a very hyper-vulnerable population online. And at the same time that Black girls are, have some of the highest rates of social media usage, right? And they have the highest rates of digital harassment, they are simultaneously one of the groups to have the least protections, algorithmic protections online. So at the time of my study, I found out that Facebook's, which is now Meta, their content moderation protocols were actually designed in a way that kind of probably unintentionally had a loophole around protecting young Black girls. And so this picture on the left is one of the training slides that folks, coders or content moderators, Facebook staff essentially are trained on about how the content moderation system works. This is defining who is protected by the algorithmic infrastructures. And in this slide, it says, which of the below subsets do we protect? Female drivers, Black children, or white men? And the correct answer is white men. But as a result, because I'm focusing on young Black girls, a lot of the insults levied against them were about Black children, right? And this has to do with the logics of how do we define a subset or a protected group. But essentially, this kind of created this phenomenon where if Black girls posted something about, white supremacy or anti-Blackness, their posts would be flagged and deleted, right? But if they received hate speech for posting that, or digital messages about lynching and whatever that were targeted towards Black children, they weren't always validated in the same ways. And then very recently, in the last year, we've seen a similar kind of phenomenon happen on Twitter, where when Elon Musk bought Twitter and removed the content moderation protocols around hate speech, the N-word actually jumped 500%. Almost immediately. So we can see how our systems, our infrastructures are actually, they play a very key role in the experiences of our young people online, right? It's not just how our young people curate their social media pages. It's not just about the amount of time they spend online. It's also about the infrastructures, right? How do we design these systems in ways that protect and uphold our marginalized groups, all of our young people, and protect wellness, right? Okay, I also found at the time of my study that these videos of Black people dead and dying were actually very profitable, right? They're clickbait, and we know how clickbait works, right? When you click on an image, then you're kind of engaging in this, like you're paying, right, for clicks. And so Google actually released a study in, I think it was 2020, where they kind of announced these are some of the, Black Lives Matter is some of the most searched terms in all of Google's history across the globe. Black Lives Matter has the highest rates of search via Google search. And so I actually disaggregated the data, and I found that some of the top searches within this hub of Black Lives Matter related search, the top 5 were all related to images of Black people dead and dying. So we're talking about billions and billions of search queries and subsequently billions and billions of clicks. And then when I disaggregated that data, right, the names of Black people dead and dying, I wanted to know specifically if somebody is looking for George Floyd or Eric Garner or Trayvon Martin, what specifically are they looking for? And as you can see in these findings, some of the top 4 related queries are related to death and dying, right? Trayvon Martin body, Trayvon Martin dead, Trayvon Martin pictures, Eric Garner video, Eric Garner death, Eric Garner NYPD. And so there is this historically situated fascination with Black death and dying, which also goes back to why Black girls, when they were reporting these images as being violations of content moderation guidelines, right? This is graphic content, this is disturbing content, this content makes me feel unsafe, that these algorithms at the time were not actually validating these images, right? We know for a fact that these videos nevertheless went viral, many times uncensored, right? So how can it be that Black girls post about activism could be considered hate speech, right? But videos of Black people dead and dying, some of the most graphic things we've seen online, were not considered violations of content moderation protocols. And again, it goes back to this idea of clickbait, that oftentimes some of the most grotesque images and videos go viral because they are lucrative, right? So I just pulled this statistic, kind of just giving like an overview, a very rough overview of how the range, the price point of different clicks can range. So we can have something, as little as 38 cents all the way up to nearly $6, right? So in this way, Black death becomes a big business, right? If George Floyd's video can be clicked on 2.4 million times, or I think it was 1.4 billion times, just think about how lucrative having that video online is. But also think about the devastating consequences that has on our young people's mental health. In addition to being a university professor, I'm also, I work with young people. I do a lot of K-12 teaching. And so I actually have a critical technology course that I teach at UCLA with high schoolers. And I find that the best way to kind of bring this information to them is to raise their awareness around technologies in schools. And so I often design curriculum for programs, or I'll come to schools as guest speakers. But yeah, I really think it's important to be in conversation with our young people, because a lot of them actually know that something is going on. A lot of them actually say the algorithm, right? As if there's like one algorithm, but they talk about, like, they understand that there's some type of curation happening, but a lot of them don't know how the actual infrastructures work, or how they can be subverted, or how they can engage in alternative forms of safety online. And so it's really important, I think, to just work directly with our youth.
So with Skylar Blankenship, they are a local outpatient therapist in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Skylar specializes in working with LGBTQIA+, as well as neurodivergent youth and young adults. And I will go ahead and hand it off to you for your presentation. Thank you.
So communal affirmation is a large positive for LGBTQIA youth. So social media provided an outlet for this youth to observe and connect with other youth in this community that they may not otherwise find outside of offline communities, especially when you look into like rural towns or more conservative areas. It also created a safe community where others can come together for life advice from other people in that community. So being able to talk about dating life struggles, identity struggles, even just like really looking at what the future could look like even as an adult for LGBTQIA youth. And it also presented an ability to explore and interact without publicly outing themselves. There are a lot of situations outside of online platforms where otherwise it's very dangerous and it can be very hazardous to be out as an LGBTQIA plus person, especially youth. So being able to explore their identity and interact with other folks in that community without having to publicly out themselves to give themselves that ability to stay safe. And a study in 2022 from the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network reported that 62% of youth use the internet to connect with other LGBTQ people in the past year. And 29% of those youth reported being more out online than in person, which very much indicates that the online platform is a safer and more supportive environment for LGBTQIA plus youth. So some of the things that come with a positive is representation. Social media presence for this community is correlated with positive mental health outcomes, and that included decreases in depression, anxiety, and paranoia. And then being able to see other LGBTQI presence on social media promoted further identity affirmation and exploration as they could see other people in that community out in the world. So I had just put some statistics from Trevor Project to kind of highlight that last point of the importance of this representation and advocacy out there. Is 89% of these youth reported seeing this LGBTQ representation in TVs and movies made them feel good about being LGBTQ. What we know about youth, and I think we all know this, is that social media and media in general, TV shows, everything is heavily influenced their life because that's what they're seeing. So being able to see that representation in the media, well, it affirms that that identity is okay to have and be strong in who they are. And then it goes for other statistics that are well over 50%, such as musicians, other celebrities, even non-LGBTQ celebrities advocating for this community. Really affirms their identity and really just affirms that it's okay to be LGBTQIA in the world. And then even just like it stems from companies and even sports. That is something that I've been seeing more recently. And I've even heard in my office with youth that I work with as a therapist of seeing athletes coming out and really like seeing some of my youth who otherwise have really struggled with their identity of both being LGBTQIA and athletes have really been able to come in and like start talking in even a slightly more positive tone about it. But with all positives, there also comes some negatives. And like it was highlighted earlier, there's no black and white here. There's no 100% good, bad. Everything comes with a positive and a negative. So unfortunately, LGBTQIA youth were also linked to experiencing and being targets of web-based victimization and bullying. That is one of the biggest things we highlight. And even just in like media campaigns about the victimization and bullying of LGBTQI youth. And it's something that as a therapist, I see quite often. Just really coming in and seeing those negative impacts and just mean messages and DMs and mean posts and seeing harassment of LGBTQIA youth, especially transgender individuals, seeing the harassment they receive out in the community with now with social media, things being recorded. So like we're seeing active images and videos of this. And sometimes it's great to promote a conversation, but it also can be really detrimental to see this more frequently because that becomes the all-encompassing thing that is in the media. And then the hostility experienced can cause these youth to create like multiple social media accounts to manage the stress in their identity. So with especially living in rural areas where it may not be as accepted and still wanting to maintain a social media presence, as is really common in this demographic, there can be split social media accounts to both manage the presence in the community, but also another separate split to manage who they are and really get to explore and grow themselves as humans. But having to manage multiple social media accounts between split identities creates a lot of stress. And as well as just social media creates its own risks for LGBTQIA youth, and they are at higher susceptibility to sexual harassment, cyberbullying, and victimization. And then as well as the hostility that's present online, these youth at an earlier age are having to learn how to navigate blocking, intercepting conversations, avoiding people on the internet, which is sometimes impossible. People are persistent, people are creative, and unfortunately not always in great ways. And it impacts their mental health, having to navigate all these struggles, not only as just a person, but also youth learning how to navigate social media in general, especially as we're seeing younger youth start having social media, especially now that some of the ability to have these conversations in climates as well are having younger youth identifying as LGBTQI plus. It kind of creates the struggle and some of the risks that have been found, and both like throughout like research looking at sources and even just personal experience as a therapist with having youth come into my office, is it's great to have identity and community, and it's found in higher rates in this youth demographic online. But it's also found that illicit content is also exposed to them at a higher rate, such as substance use, sexual content, and even promoting of eating disorder content, which already is very prevalent in social media for youth, because unfortunately there aren't a lot of mediations and protections online and what can be presented to what age and how they find it and monitoring and so many other factors. But it's really, it's a higher rate and an earlier age of content being exposed. And then I took a quote from the Surgeon General's report, and it documented that LGBTQIA youth disproportionately experience cyberbullying and online harassment and abuse, which in inverse, instead of the affirmation of identity reducing these mental health risks, we are seeing it being linked to higher rates of anxiety and depression. And just stated a little bit ago that tech companies really don't have any protections and aren't really following any guidelines to protect our youth. And a lot have started to come under fire for their roles in these health crises because there aren't any protections. And so, unfortunately, as some of the negative consequences, we're seeing more youth coming in, especially this demographic, really struggling with feeling safe, having safe places, and really being able to just have a place where it's focused mostly on their identity and affirmation and exploration. But there's still, despite all of that, a higher rate of community identity affirmation and a place to give these youth a place to exist and really learn who they are, which already is an important part of adolescence. So there's not 100% either way, but those are just kind of some of the risks and positives that come with that. So specifically within the eating disorder content, it is even just outside of youth, it kind of plays into this as well, as we find that cisgendered gay men also have a higher susceptibility to having this content be portrayed and like shown in their media, which also has kind of trickled down into these youth of where things like TikTok, where TikTok can be a great thing, but there's a lot of the algorithm picks certain things that become shows more. So if somebody sees something within that content, it starts to promote more, and LGBTQ folks tend to follow other LGBTQIA content creators. And if they're discussing it and they're following that, that algorithm picks up on that topic and starts bringing it more and more.
What strategies could therapists look to in supporting young people in balancing their social media use?
Sure. I think a lot of the focus often lands on quantity of time, but really it's about the content and quality of time that you're using social media. And so what are you actually consuming? What kind of quality of the interactions are actually happening? And so I think a lot of people do overly focus on the number of hours, the number of minutes, the number of times you check your phone, which is important too, but that's only an indicator of the actual content consumed, and what is the intention, what is the motivation behind the social media use, which is more important.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to second that. I think Additionally, as mentioned earlier, just approaching all conversations related to like social media usage from the least judgmental lens possible. I think that a lot of young people instantly turn away from discussions related to social media with other generations when there is a sense of judgment. But if conversations are approached in a curious manner without judgment, I think that you'll find the most fruitful kind of conversations, and then therefore you'll find the most fruitful means to move forward in a healthier direction.
So I always think it's helpful to share some of the like technical strategies. So one of the things I tell youth and practitioners, right, are some of the steps you can take on various platforms to like change your settings, not just privacy settings. I think some of like we're becoming a little bit more familiar with the different safety settings, but there's also like timeline cleanse settings. So you can go into like an app like Instagram and see what types of data it thinks that you like to see, and you can clear those out, right? And then you can actually add in things that you want to see. So like cute cats or right, because maybe it's picking up on the fact that you want to see activist content, but because you're tagged as an activist, you're seeing a lot of Black, Deaf, and Die, right? So that's one way. Actually having agency over your platforms, I think, is really important, because a lot of young people don't know that that's an option. And then finally, like doing a cleanse. A lot of so the older participants I have, like the 20+ year olds, they actually have like social media strategies where they do cleanses. So they'll be like, I'll go in and I will like just click on a bunch of images of cute cats, right? And to like teach the algorithm that I want to see more of this content. And then simultaneously clicking on things, maybe it's all pictures of like, you know, super skinny white supermodels, and they don't want to see that. So then they will click, show me less of this, right? And that's just like a one way of just doing that for like 10 minutes. And then they're like, I feel so good. And then it gives me a reset on my timeline. So yeah, just like those technical strategies.
I really just want to resound pretty much every point that was already made by everybody else. And I really encourage that also, just from a personal experience as a therapist. That's really what I highlight both with other practitioners, parents, and youth, is really one, not only like length of time, especially when it becomes the school year, but also the content. What are the youth really seeing? What are these algorithms picking up, and how are we changing it, and how are we addressing it? And also as parents, how are we seeing what our youth are consuming without also breaking barriers of like privacy, and also like eliminating boundaries in an unhealthy way, whereas that can almost create some more negative impacts, right? Kids like their privacy, much as everybody, right? Everybody likes privacy, but sometimes it gets into these roles of caregivers wanting to protect their children, rightly so, right? That's our hope for parents. But sometimes pushing those boundaries too much almost creates like a secretive habit for children, because that's how they're maintaining like their perceived protection. And so it can create even some more higher risks and negatives. And also being aware of like how these boundaries work for those power dynamics, so that we are having open discussions about social media, so that even as adults we can model, right, appropriate social media use, because we can start breaking that cycle of negative impacts that are coming from social media as much as we can. Nothing's foolproof, but being able to start having those conversations, and just like it was reiterated earlier, of like coming from a stance of curiosity and not judgment, right? Because, well, even just I don't like being judged. Like, I'm less receptive to other people when I feel that place. Rather, being curious. Social media is ever changing. What social media started out for me as a youth is way different than the youth nowadays. And learning what that means. How are we modifying? How are we growing with that social media? Because that's going to change how we address it, both with youth and parents, and create some more resiliency there, especially with mental health, because youth, their life is surrounded by media, and that's how they're communicating and learning and ingesting everything for the world. And that's going to impact their mental health. And so we can start growing with that. We can start reducing those risks from the get-go.
Part of what I'm hearing is we have to remember that, as Emma had said, we're not passive victims of the technology. It's important to be able to control the technology that we're given. So the next question we had was, what kind of guidance might mental health providers or peer professionals relay to parents and caretakers of youth? However, I think that we've covered that. And I do want to go to our last kind of a question we had in our center before we open to the participant questions was, what might you suggest as helpful coping responses following harmful exposure?
Sure. I think one of the things to keep in mind is how you react to when somebody tells you something, when they disclose something to you. If you tend to react in a, oh my God, we need to cut this, we need to take away your phone, we need to, I mean, that usually brings out their sense of, oh my gosh, I need to not tell them about this. They're going to worry about me so much. Like Skylar was saying, like a sense of curiosity is better. Like, what? Oh, how did you bump into that post, and how did you end up, talking with those people that are telling you these things that are kind of traumatizing? And ask more questions, find out more, get to know more about what is what the incident actually was about. Sometimes what I've been hearing from my young people that I work with in my lab, they'll say things like, oh gosh, some of this hate messaging, actually, you don't know who was actually the person who started it. So you have to kind of go all the way to the beginning. And sometimes the person who people are saying is the instigator, they're actually reacting to somebody else who was, racist in the first place, for instance. And so you have to really figure out what actually was going on there, and get to the heart of it, and just keep that dialogue open, I'd say.
I couldn't have said it better. I think obviously each individual, each young person is completely different. For me, when I struggled with my screen time usage, what I needed was about 2 months to completely unplug. But we're in an environment where social media isn't just going to evaporate, and it can really be used for good. So critically working with each young person to figure out, okay, what it is that is best for them, through that lens of curiosity rather than judgment. Again, it's critical. And I think it is important to say that the dialogue should forever be open, no matter when you are no longer considered youth. I think that obviously as social media evolves, there will be new issues and there will be new things that need discussing. But as long as you with your young people show that there's a community around them to have that discussion in a free manner that is judgment free, I think is super important and can be a great asset to lean on when the time is needed or if someone is struggling.
Yeah, I want to echo both of those. I think that those come up a lot in the research when I actually ask you, like, how do you cope? And those are things that they definitely talk about a lot. Adding to that, young people across my studies in the last 6 or 7 years that I've been doing this work, they've talked about some mental health apps that they actually think are really powerful. And so a lot of young people are finding mental health resources on mental health TikTok. This is like the new thing. And they've been telling me about collaborative journaling apps and different apps where you can be connected with other youth who are struggling, or you get 10 minutes. My niece was just telling me about an app where you can get 10 minutes that are free to text a therapist. And they give you affirmations, and yeah, it's like a free service that it's connected to an organization. But yeah, so the young people actually have some strategies that they're using, and so I think that it's important to ask them if they have resources, and then finding ways to share other resources, maybe that are generated by or young people, or even designed by young people like Emma. These are such important tools, especially for them to feel empowered. These are tools designed by and for them.
I have really anything to add, because my point would have been, Dr. Kingsley just said about how youth are really highlighting social media outlets for their mental health care. And collaborative journaling is what, I don't know if anybody else has ever checked it out, is actually one of the coolest apps I've ever seen. And I learned about it from a client. And I was like, this is neat. And I'm the therapist, and you just taught me this amazing tool. And so youth are getting creative and they're using really effective coping skills too, just outside of what we teach in therapy and like in these practices. Like these social media outlets, while sometimes can be harmful, they're finding great resources too to start coping with even the negative things that may be happening, which I think just as professionals, as parents, as really any adult in youth's life, we should just really be affirming that and really just highlighting it, uplifting it, and bringing it to more attention and being like, yes, let's do that. You guys are doing great. You're finding all these great resources already. Let's keep doing it, because hopefully that again can just start building those strength factors and some resilience.
Is there a guide for parents and other adults in creating safe space for dialogue with their youth around social media?
Couple of resources like the American Academy of Pediatrics Family Media Use Plan. You could pick out your age group of your young person, and then you can have this checklist of things you can talk about. Because as you know, with adolescents, if you get their buy-in, they're more likely to like listen to the kind of rules you want to set in the household instead of just telling them this just be, because I said so. But if they actually believe that this is a healthy way of using media, they're more likely to listen and not kind of override some of the things that you decided is best for them. I also wanted to say that I'm going to put in the chat some of the citations from my slides that people had asked for early on, and I didn't want to disrupt the conversation that was happening earlier. So I'm just going to.
A resource that I referred to a lot of parents and experts and professionals called the Dear Parents Guide. It was written by digital activists. It's written from Gen Z for parents to kind of help inform conversation. It's not robust, but I think it's a great starting place, specifically in detailing the most effective way to listen with care, which is what we've talked about: curiosity, an open mind, respect, and empathy, and respond with love, lots of questions, optimism, validation, and engagement. So it provides a really nice template for, again, taking on that curious perspective that we've emphasized in this webinar. And I think the other resources that were put into the link take you further along that line of actually creating and implementing a plan.
Okay, we are on social media. Speaking of, definitely follow us there for announcements and products that we put out. And lastly, thank you so much to all of our presenters and to you all for attending today.